One of the New Zealand official histories was frank in its assessment that Gott's appointment may seem astonishing in the light of his record. The South African historian J.A.I. Agar Hamilton was scathing in his assessment of this appointment. Gott was impossible. It has not been unknown for a commander to pass from disaster to disaster, but it is quite without precedent for any commander to pass from promotion to promotion as a reward for a succession of disasters. But Strafer Gott never assumed command of 8th Army. One day after the announcement of his promotion to Army commander, Gott was killed when his transport plane was shot down. He was on his way to Cairo to celebrate his new appointment, and the airspace was considered relatively benign. However, 2 German Me-109 fighters had been forced down to ground level after a dogfight with British fighters, when they spotted the lumbering Bombay transport plane. Rapid bursts of cannon fire damaged the plane, wounded the pilots, and forced a crash landing. Gott and 15 other passengers died when the crippled Bombay suddenly burst into flames. The New Zealand Brigadier Howard Kippenberger reached the crash site just an hour later. He was haunted by what he saw. There were, he recalled, about 14 burnt bodies lying around. Despite the horrific nature of his death, some in 8th Army regarded the event as fortunate. Freyberg wrote to Inglis soon after that while Gott's death had been tragic, and that Gott himself had great personal qualities, nevertheless, the change of regime here has been drastic and, I think, necessary. The South African General Dan Pienaar is alleged to have said, on learning of Gott's death, "Now I know that heaven is on the side of the British." Ironically, General Pienaar would also be killed in an air crash traveling back to South Africa in December 1942. But even someone as sensitive as the CIGS, Ellen Brooke, could see divine intervention in Gott's fate. Brooke later wrote, "It seemed almost like the hand of God suddenly appearing to set matters right where we had gone wrong. Looking back on those days, with the knowledge of what occurred at Alamein and after it, I am convinced that the whole course of the war might well have been altered if Gott had been in command of the 8th Army." There is little doubt that Gott as 8th Army commander would surely have been a disaster, leading it to even more defeats. As Bierman and Smith aptly surmised, the scene was surely now set for another disastrous failure of British leadership in the Western Desert. With Gott's demise, the path had been cleared for Brooke's preferred candidate for the job, Lieutenant General Bernard Law Montgomery. Montgomery's positive impact on 8th Army was immediate. But at first, Montgomery's appointment as commander of the 8th Army caused considerable trepidation, especially amongst some senior British officers. He was not regarded as a good chap or one of the team. In fact, his biographer described Montgomery during the interwar period as the most unpopular general in the British Army. Freyberg wrote to Kippenberger of this. He was very unpopular and was criticized by British officers for no reason other than they said that he was not a good fellow. This, however, gave Freyberg a certain feeling of confidence. Kippenberger recalled the news of Montgomery's appointment. No New Zealanders had heard of him, and our English friends were unenthusiastic. One English brigadier told me he was understood to be mad, and more cheerfully, that he would certainly get rid of some of the dead wood. The mad new commander assumed command 2 days ahead of time, and visited Freyberg and other commanders on that day. He arrived at Kippenberger's headquarters unannounced, spoke sharply and curtly without any soft words, asked some searching questions, met the battalion commanders, and left me feeling very much stimulated. Freyberg had also found the new commander stimulating. Upon their first meeting, Freyberg outlined to Montgomery the independence permitted by his charter, and stressed his determination to keep the 2nd New Zealand Division together and not be part of the British mania for breaking up military organizations. Freyberg also informed Montgomery that he had now witnessed the demise of 2 full generals, 11 lieutenant generals, and numerous major generals, all because they had put their trust in jock columns, brigade groups, and the Crusader tank. To his pleasant surprise, Montgomery was in complete agreement, and Freyberg never had to refer to his charter for the rest of the North African campaign. A very relieved Freyberg cabled to the New Zealand government, "It makes position here much easier, as for 2.5 years I have striven to prevent New Zealand Division being divided into brigade groups, being convinced that by fighting as a division, maximum power is developed." The era of the brigade group or cowpat battle was over. One of Montgomery's immediate actions was to send the troop-carrying vehicles 70 miles to the rear of the Alamein position, to stress that there was to be no withdrawal from where the army now stood. Freyberg passed on Montgomery's message to the New Zealand senior officers and informed them of a completely new outlook. This looking over your shoulder and cranking up to get back to the position in the rear is to cease. There was also to be a change in terminology. Consolidating, which was Army speak for sitting down and doing nothing, was to be replaced with reorganization. From now on, the term box was something with a lid on it, not a defended position. Finally, regarding battle group, we do not want to hear this word again. We are a division fighting as a division. It was a refreshing change, and one that had a huge impact on 8th Army. We were delighted, recalled Kippenberger, and the morale of the whole Army went up incredibly. Equally delighted were the Australians, whom Montgomery visited on August 14. There, at the 9 Australian Division's headquarters, he informed them of 3 principal points. These were that the 8th Army would cease looking over the shoulder and would stand and fight in its present position. Next, the formation of battle groups was to cease. Lastly, although the Australians looked brown and fit, this was deceptive. They, like every other unit in the 8th Army, required toughening and hardening, and units required training. Every opportunity was to be taken to harden the men and to raise the standard of training in units. The Australians recorded how Montgomery's message was received. The effect of the new policy was quickly apparent. General relief and satisfaction were felt when it became known that the enemy was to be met and fought in the prepared positions then held. Confidence and morale increased rapidly. From the first day of its arrival in the desert, the breaking up of the division and its formation into battle groups with inadequate fire resources and lacking the advantage of the normal system of command and control had been strenuously and continuously opposed. For these reasons, the new policy was most welcome. It was not only the Dominion formations that experienced and welcomed Montgomery's changes. The newly appointed Army Chief of Staff, Freddie de Guingand, while a great admirer of Auchinleck, admitted that 8th Army in July 1942 was craving guidance and inspiration. There was no stability of outlook and no great confidence in the outcome of a fresh encounter. Montgomery's arrival provided this missing guidance, confidence, and inspiration. And it happened almost immediately. De Guingand recalled that Montgomery's first address to his senior staff officers was electric. It was terrific. That night, he recalled that all who heard the address slept with a new hope in our hearts and a great confidence in the future of our army. De Guingand had been pleased, too, that Montgomery had ended his talk by stating he would permit no belly-aching. To De Guingand, this grand word so aptly describes the type of indiscipline that prevailed amongst commanders in the army at this time. Montgomery made this cease, and those who persisted with it soon paid the price. Montgomery's speech had not started well. He was 30 minutes late after his escort officer had accidentally led him into a minefield. It took some time to extract themselves.